Awesome. Now we're live. Welcome to yet another session with the product folks on this Saturday evening. Thanks so much for joining in, folks. And today we have John from Chargebee. John, welcome to the product folks.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, John. And seeing a lot of familiar faces again. But for those who are new, just a very, very quick intro into our community, what the product folks does. And then I'll hand it right over to Adi, who is my co-host for today, to walk us through what today's session lies for us, what is the topic, what John's going to be presenting, and a little bit about our speaker's profile. Then we'll hand it over to John for 30 to 40 minutes to walk us through some very interesting slides. And if you guys have any questions, I'm sure you'll have lots. So do add them to the chat section, to the questions tab on the right, and we'll be sure to pick that up in the last 15-20 minutes. Hope you guys have fun over the next 60 minutes, kicking this right off. To start with, a little bit about the product folks. I think we've been running this community. It's a volunteer-driven community for just about 2 years now. And it's been one crazy ride for all of us. And I'm sure for everyone who's joining us today, some of them have been with us since the very beginning. So it's been a very, very exciting 2 years for us. Today, I think we'll add a couple of links to the chat section. We have a bunch of initiatives for early stage folks, a couple of community initiatives for mid stage to later stage folks. We have Learn PM with .me, which is a learning resource, a completely free learning resource for folks who are looking to break it. We have Insurger.club, which is an early stage APM program, so do check that out. We have our teardown series, one with Square Yards, which is live right now. Got about 30 decks and the process of shortlisting is going on today. So do check that out. I think that's a very interesting competition-based approach for you to improve your product thinking. Apart from that, in case you aren't already part of our Slack channel, we'll add that to the chat section. Do check that out. And we have some interesting updates for you guys as we continue. I'll wait for Adi to kick this off, and I'll probably share some more things in the chat section. He also has some nice things to share with you. So Adi, without further ado, handing it over to you, and I'll see you guys in 30.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Suhas, and thanks for joining, John. Let's get started with the session for today. We have John Pearce with us, who's a product leader at Chargebee. He'll be talking about a very interesting topic tonight, something that garnered a lot of attention on our social platforms, especially something that every PM thinks about once a week at least I do. I think I hate product management. That's what the topic is for today. But John is a veteran in this space and has seen the ups and downs that this role has to offer. So today he'll be sharing how to bring joy in product management in what we do day in, day out. He'll be walking us through a bunch of real world strategies and insights around how they navigate this at Chargebee and otherwise too. John has had an all-round experience throughout his career, starting from sales to finance and now product and probably everything in between. He has spent over 2 decades working with companies of different shapes and sizes. So I'm particularly very excited to learn everything that he's going to share tonight. Before I hand it over to John, I just wanted to share that please don't record this session. We'll be recording it and sending it over to you. So you can just enjoy this session, ask your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll take them towards the end of this session. So with that, I would like to give it over to John, and let's roll it.
Great. Thanks, Adia and Suhas. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my my presentation here. And hopefully y'all can see it. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate everybody joining. And you're probably kind of wondering how or why I'd do a presentation on hating product management. So let me just start by saying, no, I don't hate product management. I actually love it. But some days, right, the joy just isn't there. And a little while back, I got this text from a PM that I mentor, and it said, I think I hate product management. Now what? And it was kind of disturbing me because I was like, oh no, like I've been mentoring this particular product management manager for a number of years. And how was I getting this text? But, I got to thinking, how many other PMs have this very thought, right? How often do they have the thought? Do you think that it's it's common, and I think it really is, right? I started thinking about the reasons why, and then, what can be done about it, and what's been successful for me and my teams. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because I don't want you to feel like you're kind of at the end of your trail. I'll start out by also saying, the opinions we're going to go through today are, they're kind of my opinions, and you may have some sort of disagreements with them, and that's okay. This is just based sort of on my experience, and I might say a few things that might be considered a little controversial. So I've been doing this, just so you kind of know, I've been doing the product management thing for about 12 years at Chargebee now, and then previously to that at Help Desk and Epicor. And I'm gonna tell you the story of my journey here in just a second, because I think that's an important piece of all of this. But when we think about these challenges, right? There's a lot of different ones. I don't propose that like everything you're seeing here are the exclusive list, right? But if you think about some of these things, which of these maybe affect you the most? Things like imposter syndrome or accountability without authority. Maybe sometimes you just feel like you're all alone in product, especially if you're the only product manager at a company. That can certainly be a challenge. And then, of course, there's just endless feature requests and pressure to perform. So maybe think about what some of these challenges, which ones might affect you the most. We're going to talk about most of these today. So I'm going to start with imposter syndrome, right? And imposter syndrome is that feeling of you convincing yourself that maybe you're not qualified to be here, right? And I can tell you, even after 12 years as a product manager and like 28 years in post-university work, this feeling doesn't go away. I'll be honest with you, I had this feeling this morning. I'm like, I'm about to make this presentation to all these people, and how do I know that I actually know what I'm talking about, and do I deserve to be here? It happens all the time. But I think there's some things that you can do to reduce the impact and the occurrences of imposter syndrome. I think the first thing is to tell the story of your journey. You should tell that story to yourself and tell it to the members of your team. In fact, in all of the product management interviews that I do, and I do a lot of them these days, that's the very first question that I ask in an interview. And I ask the candidate, please tell me the story of your journey into product management. And I ask this question because, as you guys probably have experienced, this is not a very linear or straight path. You probably didn't wake up in secondary school and tell your parents, gee, I want to be a software product manager. You probably just happened into it. And so I think it's very interesting to sort of understand how the person I'm talking to came to be in product and what's the journey. And what you find is that the answer to that question, when they tell their story and they tell their story of their journey, they're telling you what it is about them that's going to make them that rock star PM. So by telling that story, right, it also helps you internalize for yourself and give you that confidence to say, yes, I know what I'm doing and I deserve to be here. So I'm going to tell you my story. So when I graduated from college, the job market was really not quite good. It was very hard to get a decent, well-paying job. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. I got a degree in economics, not exactly a hotbed of career choices when you do that. So I managed to get myself a job in sales. And you might say, well, why sales? Partially because they'd hire me, but also my dad was a salesperson. My two older brothers still are salespeople. So I thought, that might be a good job for me. So I started in software and hardware sales in the computer business. And I was selling these really quite expensive systems to these business owners. But I was young and I was inexperienced and I really looked young. I didn't have all this gray hair that I have now. And so I knew that I really needed to dig in on the software itself and the value that it provided for the customer to be successful. And doing that helped me to be successful. I actually had 3 really good years in sales. 2 of them I actually won the President's Club incentive trip. So you have to be good to do that. And articulate the value. And so from there, in professional services and solution consulting, I worked a lot with the engineering team to help communicate to them what the propositions were that I was seeing out there in the field with the customers. Then I kind of took a hiatus for some personal reasons and got out of the software business. Went to go work for a customer, and when I needed to make a change, I got a call from the VP of engineering from the software company I had been working for. And he said, well, how about you come work for us, and maybe would you consider helping our engineering team build products that customers want to pay for? And I thought, wow, like I totally could do that. I know exactly what customers want. I just was a customer. I know what I would consider valuable and what I would pay money for. And I said, well, what is that role? And he said, well, I don't really know. We'll tag you in our HR system as like a senior development engineer, which is actually kind of funny because I don't write any code, never have. But also read this thing called this Agile Manifesto, because we're like making a transition to that. And so I read that, and I read through that, started doing the work, and I realized, I'm a product manager, right? I didn't know what a product manager was. I hadn't had the experience of working with product managers before, but that was the job that I was doing. And I was like, wow, this is great. I finally found what I want to be when I grow up. I was 38 years old at the time. And so at 38, I figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up as a product manager. And I have found what I'm passionate about. And every time I tell the story, it reminds me that most of my career, I was doing the things I needed to do to be successful product manager. So while I can only say I had the title in the role specifically for the last 12 years, I can say that almost my entire 28-year working career, I've been doing the things
So sorry guys, I think network issue. Just give us a second. Adi, are you?
a lot of people call this your superpower.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Out there in the market, there's like over 10,000 books in the product management category, and thousands of blogs and articles and LinkedIn groups, dozens of podcasts. There's a lot out there that can tell you, they'll talk about superpowers and they'll say how important it is, and I agree with that. But I think it's really important for you to identify your superpower and name it, right? Identify it, articulate it to yourself. I don't necessarily think you want to go around, screaming from the treetops what your superpower is.
John,
my executive coach actually articulates this in a little bit different way, and he says, identify what it is that your company pays you uniquely to do. And I like that kind of better than a superpower. It sounds a little bit less heady. But you really need to figure out what that is and make sure that you're optimizing towards it. And just a hint there, I don't think that you can read what this is in a book or learn it from a podcast. I think you really just have to figure out what it is about you that is your superpower. And if you can't, or if you don't know what it is, maybe ask your peers. They'll probably do. I had a situation here just recently at Chargebee where one of the employees that works for me named my superpower for me. And it's the kind of thing that I think I already knew what it was. I feel like I did, but I probably didn't articulate what it was and couldn't put it down on paper. But I think it's really important to do that, because then when you're operating in your product management job and in your space, you can make sure you're optimizing towards what you know and everybody else recognizes you're already good at.
John, I think we lost your deck in case you
And then
could check.
last, this might be a little bit controversial, but hear me out. Practice what you already know. I think there's a real push out there as we get more and more of those books and the podcasts and all those kind of things coming out, to always be learning all kinds of new tips and tricks and frameworks and all this kind of stuff. But, I think there's something to be said about getting better at what you're already good at. I mean, the truth of the matter is you got this far, right? Tiger Woods is a famous golfer, right? He practices golf. That's what he practices. I don't think he practices tennis or badminton, right? He practices golf because that's what he's good at. That's what he's paid to do. It's not to say that you can't get better at what you're doing and learn stuff, but a lot of times people will talk about, well, maybe I should learn how to code so I can be a more technical product manager. And I feel like I have this weakness there, right? And I would argue that's just distracting you from your mission, right? Learn more about your craft and hone the skills that you've already built instead of trying to go build a bunch of new ones. I think you need to remember you did the work and got the job, right? You made it to the mountaintop. Or maybe you got the job and did the work, but you've been successfully here. Remind yourself of that. It's okay to remind yourself for that you've done all this good work and you've made it this far. So now we'll kind of move into challenge number 2. And I didn't necessarily put these in any priority order. I know product managers out there, we like to always talk about priority, right? I don't know that it's necessarily in any priority order, but I would say this one's probably a really big challenge for many of us. And I'm certainly on that with you. But I think the good news is I've had a lot of experience where I think you can overcome this in ways that not only make it easier for you to do your job and be successful, but I think you actually build a better product when you do. And I know this because I've practiced these things over and over again, and we do a lot of these at Chargebee today. So the first thing I want to talk about is decision making. And I think what's really important here is that many PMs go about thinking it's their job to make decisions. And I kind of have a different opinion. I tell my people all the time, your job actually isn't to make the decision. Your job is to provide the context to the business so that the business can make the decision. Now, we have to recognize that if the business fails to make the decision, ultimately you're going to have to. But I think that you do the things that help the business to make the decision, and that's provide them the context. Help them understand what the problem is, what the potential solutions are to move forward, or even more importantly, just that problem's important enough to solve. But what it does is when you get the business to make the decision versus you, right? The decision becomes our decision, not my decision. And when that happens, you don't really need as much authority to make progress, right? Because we're just doing this thing that we all agreed was the right thing to do, not what I said we needed to do, and then now I need to get you to do it. The other thing that is really, really important, and this is a wonderful tool, and I really think you should be using this, is the solutions workshop approach. And what this really is, and you don't even have to make it very formal, but what this really is saying, my job as a product manager is to identify the problem, and it is not my sole responsibility to define the solution. And so I'm sure you may be familiar with some of the design thinking approaches like the double diamond design thinking approach. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time today talking about in detail about this subject. But what I want to point out here is that you want to use your team to define the solution. And if you're in a situation where you either feel yourself or your team feels that it's your job to define the solution, then I would argue it's time to convince yourself and others that that's not the best way that this can be done. So in the double diamond design thinking model, the product manager squarely works on the first diamond, right? Identifying the problems and prioritizing which ones might be the most important ones to solve. But then that's the point where the handoff happens to the solutions team, which the product manager is a part of, right? But also the design folks and the engineering leads, QA, bring in those stakeholders and say, how can we solve this problem together? And when you do that, you get alignment on the execution. Why? Because you now don't need the authority to implement this, because they're now implementing our solution, not your solution. So it takes away the need to sort of have the authority. And we had a great example of this happen last year at Chargebee. So we had this reconciliation tool that we had with a couple of our accounting packages, and it really, quite honestly, was not a great customer experience. We had a lot of challenges with it. It was confusing. Customers didn't quite understand how they were supposed to operate the tool. And we tried a lot to keep tweaking it, and we weren't really making any satisfactory progress. And so we decided to kind of take a step back and get the team together. We put the product manager, designer, engineering lead together and redesign the experience. And it turns out we didn't have to like totally scrap it, right? But because we got the team together to be thinking about the problem together and coming up with a solution, the results were a much more improved experience. And in fact, we got an email from a really challenging customer of ours who, one might say, just wanted to always complain. And it started out, he says, I can't believe I'm saying this, but great job. You guys really solved this problem. And so think about it. What's great about this is, one, we got alignment. Two, we didn't need to wield a bunch of authority to get this done and solve this problem. And three, we built a better product. So if you're not able to do this, you're not doing this, this is something that I think is really, really important to talk with your team about doing. And trust me, it'll really, really help with the authority problem. And then the third area to help with not having a lot of authority is alignment. And actually, that might be the strategy that I found to be most successful in my career in terms of getting over this authority challenge. And this involves your strategy. And at Chargebee, we set the strategy at the company level, and then each department kind of creates their own vision on how they can help the company achieve their goal. And the same is true in management. So last year, I joined in March, so over the 9 months of the last year, I refined my portfolio strategy probably once each of the 3 quarters I was there. And these really weren't pivots, right? They were just adjustments and tweaks as the market intelligence came in and made suggestions about, how we should adjust our strategy. What are we thinking about the market, the customer needs, and ever. And then I did a lot of communication of strategy to various stakeholders across the company, right? And, this isn't rocket science, folks, right? Like, we know in our minds that this is the right thing to do, right? Create your strategy, communicate it wide. But I'm telling you, this really, really works. These touch points, it's amazing to me how much it affected the outcome. So after one of these strategy sessions, an engineering manager that I work very closely with reached out and said, let's have a meeting next week to talk about how we're going to implement the strategy. I said, well, that's great. You always want that. And we got on this meeting and he laid out a plan. And he said, I'm thinking about this. We should implement this in this way. And it's going to solve a lot of needs for the customers, but also a lot of needs for the company and for, resolving tech debt and things like that. And it was great because his vision was really outstanding and we adopted it. as the way in which we're going to achieve our strategy. We call it internally Project Catalyst, and it's a key big rock item for us even this year. And our roadmap is really very much around it. Needless to say, I don't have any issue driving priority to executing on this project, right? Because this was not something that, hey, John said we have to do this. This was, hey, here's what we're trying to achieve. And everybody kind of rallies around that with the solution that was come up. And it just really, really makes a huge difference being aligned. So I can't stress enough how important articulate your vision, tie it together with your strategy, share it wide, and reap the benefits. So number 3, feeling alone. And, this could be something that, could be happening because you might be the only product manager in the company, or maybe you're one of a very few people focused on product. It may also just be that you're the only product manager on a squad that has, Scrum Masters and engineers and QA folks and release managers and things like that. But feeling alone can be really, really challenging. Some days you can sit there and say, am I the only one that cares about this stuff? And it's probably not true. I mean, I think the engineer call would say, oh, no, we care about this, right? But they care about it maybe in a different perspective than, say, a product manager does. And so I think it's pretty easy. There's 2 things you can do to combat this. Number 1, talk to your friends, talk to your peers, join a community. I can guarantee you they're feeling the same way. And it can be really lonely being that only PM on your squad, or even the only PM in the company. But when you join a community like the product folks, right, what you find is you're not alone, right? People are experiencing the same thing. Look at the subject of this talk, right? I think I hate product management. What are all the things that really drag, kill the joy out of this job? People don't talk about this stuff enough. And the truth of the matter is, it's very real, right? It's very, very real. But I think talking to other folks can really help you get over that challenge and recognize that, it's pretty much the same at every company, right? There's tension between product and engineering everywhere. Hopefully in your company, it's a healthy tension, not an unhealthy tension. But talk it out. In addition to talking to your peers, I think there's another area. This is another area where like strategy and alignment can be extremely helpful in helping you not feel alone, right? Getting your squad on board with your vision and your strategy is really important, because then again, it becomes ours and not yours, right? And then you're going to feel less alone when you're in a group working towards the same objectives. So, next area. This one I know every PM experiences, right? The endless feature requests. Feature requests, more feature requests. And I often wonder, sometimes out loud, can we not just sell what the product already does? And if I could see you all, I could probably see a lot of heads nodding and all of that saying, yeah, why can't the salespeople just sell what the product already does? And I'm going to warn you, what I'm about to say is going to be probably considered controversial for sure, heretical maybe. I'm going to tell you that the endless feature request problem is our fault in product management. This is completely our fault. And I think we have this happen because we're not doing some things that we should be doing. The first thing is we need to define guardrails for the go-to-market teams, right? They really need to understand where the product fits well and where it needs to fit well in the future if it doesn't fit well today. It's all about your strategy. So two gentlemen, Ben Foster and Rajesh Nurlikar, wrote a book called Build What Matters, highly recommended, by the way. And they introduced this topic pretty early in the book, page 28, and they have this diagram. And when I saw this diagram, I can never get it out of my mind. And I talk about it a lot. So let's walk through this as an illustration. So what you see here is the black box. And in the black box is where the product, as they say, wins today. So this is where the product really fits well in your customer base. And the white dots are feature requests that you get that are inside that square. And then the gray square that's kind of around it, and I hope there's enough contrast on the screen share here that you all can see that. The gray square that fits around it, that's like where your product should win. Hint, that's your roadmap, right? And the black dots in the gray boxes are the feature requests that come in sort of for that area. These are all really good feature requests. Like these are ones that you should be thrilled to work on. Why? Because it probably, if you're doing your job right, it aligns with your product strategy, right? It's roadmap items you already planned on doing anyway. And it's great. But here's where your responsibility comes in, right? Those gray dots that are outside the gray square, so you see them all around in the big circle, those are things you should say no to, right? You should say no to those. But your responsibility is your team. You need to have your go-to-market teams understand what's inside or outside the box. They don't know. They're not going to know, right? You've got to define that for them. And this is why I think this is maybe controversial, because I don't think we think about it this way, right? I think we sit there and we're like, yeah, we publish our roadmap. We have our product, our product documentation says this is what our product does. We publish our roadmap, and like that's what we're supposed to do, right? And the reality is, no. That's your job to define these boxes for your teams and make sure they understand them. Now, if they know what's a good fit and what's not, then you can reasonably ask them to focus their attention in those squares. And it also gives you, cover when you want to say no, right? Because you can say, look, remember, as we talked about, this is where our focus is, this is where we're going, this is where we know we win. And this is where we know we need to be winning. So this is where we're focusing our attention, and what you're asking for, right? It's way outside that. It's not a good fit. Now, are you going to get them to just buy into that all the time? Well, certainly not, right? They've got a quota to meet, right? They want to sell systems. Hopefully you have what I kind of refer to as the passive aggressive salesperson who thinks that their job is to get roadmap items done by like putting them into sales contracts, so that you're kind of forced into doing it. If you have those, I think talk to some folks about trying to eliminate that from your organization. So again, the book is Build What Matters by Ben Foster and Rajesh Nurlikar. I highly recommend it. It's available on Amazon. So part 2 of your job on this is to eliminate the black box, right? Transparency into what product management is doing in process, right? And you got to share that information a lot, all the time. Show your work, right? How are you making these priority decisions? What's in the black box versus the gray box? Show and tell all the time. It's your job to share, not their job to ask, right? It's not a salesperson's job to come to you and say, help me to understand the roadmap. It's your job to make sure that they're understanding the roadmap. So you might be asking, right? This is all great, John, like very ideal, wonderful. But like, does that actually work? Right? Does it actually reduce to requests? And I don't have the stats. I haven't done any kind of like longitudinal study or anything to sort of prove this. So again, this is just John's opinion coming out. But when you're dealing especially with professional sales organization, those salespeople will understand exactly what you're telling them. And they'll recognize that, all right, if our product really wins in this space, this just gives me a really, really good qualification tool with my prospects. And the highly professional salespeople don't want to waste time with customers where the product is going to be a tenuous fit. They just say, I need to move on and find the prospect or our solution that fits, and not waste a bunch of time wrangling back and forth about, can we get this feature done? I really want to win this business, that kind of stuff. But they got to know the zone, right? They got to know the guardrails, the box, whatever you want to call it, right? They got to know, or they're not going to be able to do it. But even if I'm wrong and the requests don't go down, the transparency that you provide kind of has your back for when you say no, because people will understand sort of the process. You know, I had a situation not too far in the past where a customer service manager, or a customer success manager, excuse me, came to me and said, hey, John, do you guys actually like listen to customer requests and like factor those into your decisions? And I have to admit, it felt like kind of a knife in the heart, because I'm like, well, of course we do. Like, how would you even ask this question? But he explained to me, he said, you know, at my previous job, we'd have these big customer conferences, and they would go and write things on these whiteboard walls that we made in the conference center, and we would, you know, talk as a group and prioritize, and it was just very out in the forefront, right? He says, I don't see that here. And it really hit home to me about how important this is, because if they can't see it, they don't know what's happening, right? So that's why eliminating the black box is so important, because now they can see it and they will understand, here's what we are doing. Here's how we're listening to the customers. This is what we're doing. Publish metrics on it. Okay. So then we'll finish up with pressure to perform. And this one, you know, might be another one of these areas where people might cringe, but you know, you have all of these metrics you hear out there: acquisition and NPS, conversion, ARR, LTV to CAC, right? So many metrics people are asking you to move. And, you know, somebody's probably making up a new one as we talk today. And a lot of these are vanity metrics, right? They actually are not very indicative of the success of your product or your business, but yet it's what gets all the attention, and people are looking at it, investors look at them, and all this kind of stuff. So here's where I go with some of the controversial things. I think you should probably ignore a lot of these. Now, granted, if your leadership says that this is what you want to manage to, and it is your job to move these metrics, then that's one thing. But if you have the opportunity to sort of define what is success in your role, then I would say focus on what you can control. And what you can control is not the pipeline. You don't generate pipeline generally. You don't do demos. You don't close deals. So you likely don't have control over that. You probably have little or no control over acquisition costs. You probably don't set pricing, and you surely don't have any control over discounting. That's purely a sales thing. But what you can control is the solution addressable market, or the SAM. And so that should be your focus, right? How can I expand the opportunity market with my product strategy? How will this feature, if I build this feature, what additional new opportunities will this have? What sort of parts of the market do I open? What interesting problems do I solve for our customers to generate expansion and growth in their business? And then set your OKRs around this, because you can actually control it. Does that mean you shouldn't look at having NPS as a metric to work towards? Yes, you should, right? Because your customers should find value in your product. But if you're building a product that expands the SAM, then you're identifying value and you're identifying and adding value to your product every single day. And NPS is very important about customer satisfaction, and things like usability factor into all that. And it is important, but you also have to ask yourself, are you driving to the right things if that's all you're focusing on, right? But we know that every company wants to grow. And so if you're building product that expands the SAM, you're growing. Okay. Next thing about pressure to perform, again, maybe a little bit against the conventional wisdom, but optimize to strengths, not your weaknesses. And that could be your strengths, your team's strengths, your company's strengths. Again, where do we win today and where do we need to win tomorrow? Don't worry about what's out there on the fringes. You know, in a lot of interviews, they ask you, oh, what's your weakness, right? And I'm going to say this, and I'm proud to say it. I don't ask that question in interviews. I think it's one of the worst interview questions, because the truth of the matter is, well, one, people aren't going to be, they're going to try to minimize their weaknesses. And so they're going to try to spin a story in the answer that says, well, I have this weakness that's really not a weakness. It's actually a hidden strength, and you should hire me because it's going to be my superpower, right? Or you actually recognize reality that says, you know, especially the later you are in your career, if you've got these weaknesses now, you're not going to fix them, right? They're just always going to be your weaknesses. So optimize towards your strengths. Put your focus at what you do well, and just keep doing it better and better, right? You're going to waste a ton of productivity and add to your stress if you try to keep focusing on that weakness that you perceive that you have, and you say, oh, I got to get better at this, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but think about how much you could do if you got just better at what you already were pretty good at, right? Just keep getting better at that. And oh yeah, one other thing. People tend to do better and perform better at things they find enjoyable. And if you're focusing on your weaknesses, I got to believe psychologically that's very fun, right? But if you're optimizing your strengths, it's a lot more fun and you're going to do better. Now, the last one is interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but converting stress from bad to good. Harness the power that the stress of your job is putting on you and harness it for good. And I know what you're thinking is, wait, I've heard stress is bad, right? Stress kills, all this kind of stuff. And stress can be bad. But, here at Chargebee, we do a weekly podcast listening session. And in that podcast listening session, we wrote down and people bring a podcast or a TED Talk or something to the team, and we listen to it together and discuss it. And not too long ago, somebody brought this podcast to us, Kelly McGonigal. She's a scientist. She studies human physiology and behavior and stuff. You really got to go watch this TED Talk, right? It's titled How to Make Stress Your Friend. And in it, she notes that you can use the physiological effects of stress to do good in your body. Yep, it's true. You can and you should, because if you don't, stress is not good, right? But if you can use it to be beneficial, that would be. Watch the talk. She'll give you all the evidence, the science behind it that I can't speak to. I just watched it and okay, seems pretty reasonable. But the TLDR on this is, when you're stressed, if you take that stress and the physiological effects of the adrenaline pumping, et cetera, that stress tends to do, and turn it around and help others, negative stress will turn into positive stress on you and your body. And I saw this podcast and it really, really made me think. And one of the first things I was questioning it, like I'm sure you are right now, saying, really, is this true? And then I thought back on my own life and my own experience. And I said, wait a minute, maybe I have actually experienced this. See, a little over a year ago, me and about 40 other employees that I with found ourselves out of work. At the time, I had 2 kids in college and a wife in graduate school. So to say the timing was pretty awful is probably an understatement. But as I look back on that period, I wasn't nearly as stressed as one would think you'd be. This is clearly one of the more stressful type situations anybody can go through over the course of their life. But I really wasn't that stressed out. And I got to thinking, why? And I even said to the group before we adjourned the meeting that day, and I said, I had this situation. I described the situation. I said, I really wasn't that stressed. And I need to dig into that and figure out why that was and see if what she's saying is really true. And as I went back and I thought about it, it was. Because I know that I turned the bad stress to good stress because I was helping many of the other people that were out of work as well with me. And I was just talking to them, right? Listening, helping them tweak resumes, taking reference calls, all that kind of stuff. And what wound up happening was refocusing my energy to empathy and away from things like fear and uncertainty. So when you're feeling stressed in this job, my recommendation is seek out ways you can help others, their problems, their challenges, and their stress, right? Help a fellow PM with a complex prioritization problem. Maybe join a solutions team and work out a solution to a particularly vexing problem you're having with the product. If you have an escalation going on, raise your hand and say, you know what, I can jump in and help out here. Find a way. I guarantee you won't regret it. So that's Kelly McGonigal. It's a TED Talk from 2013, How to Make Stress Your Friend. I really, really, really recommend that you go and you watch it. So that kind of brings us to the end of my prepared presentation. And I'll just cite by saying, tell your journey story. It's important. Use your unique superpower and practice your craft. Provide context, not decisions, and remember, problems are your job, not solutions. Align your stakeholders, find your community. Define where you win, eliminate the black box, and communicate, communicate, communicate. Expand the SAM by playing to your strengths. And remember always, help each other. For as much as you feel alone and stressed, there are others who could surely use your help. And one last thing, if you don't have one, get a mentor. I don't believe you need to be at the end of your trail. Rather, employ some of these techniques and you'll be driving off into the sunset. So my fellow product people, go forth with joy.
Thank you so much. I think, hope you can hear us right now.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was awesome, John. I think lots and lots of feedback that we were receiving. A couple of interesting turn of events while you were presenting, but I hope everything went well. Lots of questions that we've already received, and John, lots more from the deck that you've shared. Since we have a couple of minutes left, I'll jump right in. We have a couple of questions that we had picked up from the community also. I'll just start off with one or two there, and then we'll jump right into the audience Q&A for the paucity of to start off with, I think we were chatting with one of your colleagues earlier, just before you joined, and he mentioned that no matter what the situation is, you seem to be super cool while you are able to manage both upwards and downwards and share any kind of information with the team by putting your point forward. any tips and tricks from the 20, 25 years of experience that you have for the rest of us? Because I'm sure this is a thing we all face day to day.
Yeah. I think as a product manager, it's pretty important to be unflappable, right? Because things are going to happen. And I think I will say that, obviously experience helps, right? Like it just, the more and more experience you have, maybe the more comfortable you are with dealing with these types of things and worrying so much about them. But I think a lot of the things that I talk through, right, about some of these activities, these things that you can be doing as a product manager will also help you there. Just if you're very transparent what you're doing, your thought process, things like that, you can, whether you're going up, sideways, down in the organization, I think you can really, really get your point across and exercise your influence in ways that are a lot easier and less stressful because you've been transparent all along, right? People understand what are you trying to do and why, and then it makes it that much easier to sort of get buy-in, whether it's up, down, sideways.
Thanks, John.
I think another extension of the same question was, since a PM constantly works with the designers, developers, and else in the team, how does one go about building good interpersonal relationships at work? Because as a PM, you are the glue of the entire team. You need to get everyone together and show them. So any actionable tips on that aspect?
Yeah. I think some of the best things you can do is not talk about work sometimes, right? I think just look, this job, it's about relationships, right? It is about relationships. And, probably should have been a bullet in my presentation, right? Which is, if you don't have the relationship, the authority is going to be a real hard piece to get as well, right? It's just not going to be there. But if sometimes you just have a chat with somebody and you just talk about something going on in your life, or something, for me, on a lot of these, everybody's doing Zoom now, right? We're all doing the video conferences. We're in our homes. Anything can happen, right? I've got a lot of pets. I've got 3 or 4 dogs, depending if my son's home, and a couple of cats. And I've got a cat that loves to Zoom bomb. He sits there. I mean, my daughter was actually saying, should we just have him perched right next to me? Because I've got this picture of me sitting there on a Zoom call, and he's just his head's right here, and he's just looking like he's ready to jump into the conversation. And I think, the more we recognize that we're all human beings, right, in the relationships, and stuff like that, I think that builds a trust. It shows sort of integrity, and people want to work with people they trust, right? And that they feel like they know, and they recognize, it's like when I talk about joining a community, right? One of the most important things you can do is recognize you're not in this alone, right? And that goes with dealing with your engineering folks, right? I mean, we think we're under a lot of pressure. They are, right? Deadlines, and if we're not, I guess the other thing I would say is I like to use this phrase, when hiring for experience, I like to have somebody that's walked through the fire a few times, right? Because they know how to deal with it, right? They know they've kind of been there. This isn't the first time they've done it. But at the same time, they have to be able to build that kind of relationship that you want to walk through the fire with them. Because they may not be in a position to say, okay, line up, we're going through the fire, right? You may.
I think
We just lost his audio.
Yeah.
We'll just wait for him to come back. So I think he should be back in a minute, guys. In case you haven't signed up, I have a very, very exciting session coming up for you all tomorrow. This one's the Y Combinator Founder. I think John's back. John, I think we lost you for the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Go for it. I think she was just wrapping up that one. I think we'll pick up a couple of audience questions.
Okay.
I'll start off with the one that's right on top. This one is around the burnouts, right? And it ties back to some of the points that you mentioned on the deck. Kunal asks, does constant context switching lead to a burnout? And how do you handle multiple stakeholder meetings while also taking some time out for like focus or deep work? What's your mantra?
You notice I didn't talk about that a lot in my presentation because I'm not sure that I actually have figured that one out yet. I think again, though, it goes back to that as a product manager, the more strategically we're thinking, right? The higher level sort of we're thinking and communicating around our strategy. And when I say strategic, maybe don't tie it specifically to a product strategy, but thinking in terms of the way in which you're thinking and operating, strategic versus tactical, right? And tactical, it's very, I'm going to do this, right? And you just got all this stuff. You got all these meetings and stakeholders. If we look at our job as much more of a strategic job, right? And we've got all of these stakeholders we've got to be dealing with, then it goes back to that transparency and the communication. And the more transparent you are, the more communicative you are about what your strategy is, probably the less stakeholder management you're going to have to do because they understand. Where you get stakeholders wanting to have update meetings is because they don't know, right? And so they say, I don't understand the status on this project or where we are with this or what our plans are around this market segment. And so they ask for a meeting, and then that's just another meeting you got to put on your calendar. But the more you can do to be proactively communicating and transparent about what you're doing and what you're hearing, the least likely you're going to need for those conversations. So one of the things that I do personally is I keep like a journal every week of what's going on in my product portfolio. So I have 8 product managers underneath me working on all different areas of the portfolio. And I recognize that my boss needs to understand sort of what's going on. And there's 8 different components, right? And I need to understand what's going on, but it's 8 different things. And I know I can handle like 3, right? So I just keep a running journal every week of what's going on in my portfolio, and it's publicly shared with my boss. So we don't necessarily have to go into all these different stakeholder meetings or even meetings with him and say, here's everything that's going on, because he can go see it, right? We're kind of working out in the open as far.
Sure. Adi, do you want to go for one last question? I think we're just over time. We could do one question and then the rapid fire.
Yeah, so a couple of people were trying to understand if how important an MBA or relevant tech experience is to get into the workforce. As someone who has had a diverse career experience in finance, in sales, in education, and arts, how do you go about suggesting people who don't have the relevant experience to break into product management? This is one of the most sought after questions, but yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
All right, so I'm going to start off by 2 disclaimers. One, I do not have an MBA, so you need to understand that my answer is going to be biased. Okay, yeah, I'm not convinced that an MBA is a prerequisite at all, and I'm not saying I don't look at it favorably. But if you think that getting an MBA is your guarantee into the product management space, I would argue from my perspective, the answer is no. There may be companies out there that are like MBA is like minimum critical. But I'm going to tell you a story. I had a product manager working for me. It was an internal promotion from a customer success position. This particular product manager has not had one single university class, not even a bachelor's degree. He's one of the product managers I've ever worked with because he has soft skills and relationship skills and empathy for the customer. And I'm not sure that any B school in the world can teach you that. So now, having said that, another PM that I've worked with recognized that they had some weakness on the business side and went and got the MBA specifically to fill that gap in their knowledge base. And so in that was a good move, right? But it wasn't necessarily to say, oh, I'm getting this resume checkoff item that will just like qualify me to be a product manager.
Got it. No, thanks. That helps. John, since we're running out of time, I'll probably shoot you the rest of the questions whenever you're free in case we could do an AME on the Slack channel, or even if we could keep it async and then share the rest of the questions. Yeah. To end off, we usually do a really interesting rapid fire that most of our audience loves. So these are just two questions that we have for you, and pretty generic, but would love to hear your viewpoint on this. The first one is, who are folks that you'd like to shout out to? These could be your peers, these could be your mentors, but anyone that you think our community might find interesting to follow or just get connected with.
Yeah, I'll tell you a book that I read that was not in the presentation, but I think is really impactful for product managers. It's a product positioning book by April Dunford. I'm gonna have to grab it off the shelf to get the title exactly.
Sure thing.
Yeah, there it is. Obviously awesome. Obviously awesome. April Dunford. It's about product positioning, but I think it's really, really critical for the way you think about your product. So I would definitely give a shout out to her and her writings and teachings. I think are just fantastic. She's also a great speaker. I saw her at a conference. I wondered whether somebody was going to ask about this.
No.
I'll just call out the founders of Chargebee. Absolutely, these guys, they really, really understand this incredible balance of empathy between customer, business, and employee, and they've got a formula they figured out. And so, it's I can't obviously hire everybody on this session, but boy, I would love to, because this is a great place to be. So shout out to Krish and Raman, KPS, and Tiago. These guys have built an incredible business.
Absolutely. And John, the last question from our side, kind of cliche, but it gives us a very interesting perspective. If there was one thing that John would like to tell his 25-year-old self, what would that be? I know it's a long time ago for you, but what's one thing?
Thanks for saying that, Suhas. Appreciate it. Yeah, I think I would say stay the course. I think, I look at my career, my life in general, and there were times where I would say, look around me and feel like other people are like passing me by and progressing much faster in their career. But I've gotten to the point in my life where actually, I might actually win the race, right? And yet it was just a kind of slow and steady, stay the course, a little bit of risk, not a lot of risk, that kind of stuff. And that worked. I can't say that's going to work for everybody else, but don't sweat it, folks. And especially at 25, my goodness, you got plenty of time, right? You're going to work your whole life. Like, don't worry, don't rush into doing it 80 hours a week now. I mean, you got plenty of years to work, right? Stay the course, have a plan, execute on the plan, of course, but just don't feel like you got to conquer the world by 30. Oh, and another thing I would say to everybody on the call is every decade gets better, by the way. So if you're in your 20s right now and you think it's good, just wait till your 30s.
Oh, no, thanks, John. I think one thing a lot of people on this section mentioned even earlier is the fact that you kept it so real and everyone loved the authenticity. So thanks so much for actually sharing this. not often do we get to hear someone's perspective who's been there, done it for such a long time, and especially someone who's actually been across so many different industries, had such a diverse background. So I think it was very refreshing for us as well, as those we've done a bunch of these sessions to hear something.
Yeah.
Often it becomes okay, what's new, right? We try to find something new, but in your case, I think we got a lot of that were pretty tactical, pretty to the point. Honestly, we loved it, and I think the chat sections also like plus one on what we said. So thank you, John. I think this was
Good.
pretty amazing.
Glad it was helpful. I hope everybody got a lot of value out of it.
No, absolutely. I think folks, you could check out the chat section too. I think they definitely reco us. And guys, at that, I'll share a link in the chat section. John did share one of his favorite books. So in case you guys like the session, do let us know your views on this link, and we'll share across one lucky a copy of that book. In case you haven't read it already. So I'll just share a link. Feel free to quote tweet or reply to it, and we'll pick one winner by Tuesday, and we'll ship the book to you. So that's just a sweet note, but the whole idea is in case you liked it, do definitely let John know. We also did share John's LinkedIn ID earlier. Don't spam him. Feel free to reach out with some context. John, would that be the best way to reach out to you? What would be the best?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely fine. I'm happy to entertain connection requests and direct messages. Just don't try to sell me something.
No, absolutely. I think a bunch of them were also asking for like tips to break into Chargebee. I think a couple of folks are interested to work with you, especially. I hope maybe whenever there's a opportunity on your team that opens up, they get a chance. So I think we did share a link.
I do have an opening right now on my omni-channel squad. So if there's anybody out there with mobile experience and mobile app store like Apple App Store and Google Play experience, I'd love to hear from you.
And no better opportunity than this. Honestly, you've heard John for the last 60 minutes, and I'm sure you'll love working with him. So do check that opportunity. Send a contextual thing, and in case you do break into Chargebee, do let us know. It'll be something that we'll definitely root for. So with that, John, we'll catch you backstage. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you. And for anyone else who's Adi, you want to add something?
No, I was just thanking John for the session. We all are seeing how appreciative people are in the chat. So thanks a lot for this honest and very candid session.
John.
Great.
For everyone else who's still on the session with us, we have some very exciting sessions lined up tomorrow. Like I mentioned earlier, we're doing this series. It's a new series. It's a continuation of the founder stories that we had started. We actually hosted Krish as well a couple of weeks back. I'll probably share the link again. But we're continuing this with a bunch of YC founders, because we found a couple of our community members had applied for YC this year, and a bunch of them were looking to with early stage founders. So we thought we'll just bring them and bridge that gap. So in case y'all are interested, do join in. I think Saurabh has shared a link in the chat section. Do check that out. Also, if you guys like the session, do share your feedback so that we know what kind of session we could organize. Chargebee especially is into the subscription billing for those who haven't come across the platform earlier. In case you're looking to implement it, do let us know at your companies. We could connect you to the team. In case you're looking for something specific around this, we'd love to go deeper as well, right? So this was a great experiential session. But in case you're looking for anything around payments, is there anything specific that you guys want to learn about? We'd love to go deeper into this. I think we've started a workshop series as well on analytics and design is something we've covered. In case you want something around payments 101, or they've been doing a lot of integrations, so we could chat around that on the next session in a couple of weeks or a couple of months from now. So do let us know. With that, signing off for this Saturday. Adi, did I miss something that you'd like to add in? Anything that I missed?
No, nothing else. You pretty much covered everything. Thanks everyone for joining on a Saturday night. And it clearly shows that you want to learn and grow in your career. So hope this was helpful. Thanks, John, again for the session. Thanks everyone for joining in. Do let us know your feedback, and we'll keep doing exciting events for all of you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
See you on the other side. Do DM us in case of any feedback. Forgot to mention that, but DMs are always open. Pretty active on Twitter. And with that, see you guys tomorrow.